We had been running again for a while now. Leaving that cursed place didn't do much for us when we had brought the inhabitants with us. Just one dinosaur had followed us to the outside world for now, but I had a feeling that the others would not be far behind now that they had seen a way out. To make matters worse, we did not come out of the portal in the place we thought we would. No Bermuda Island, or any island for that matter, was in sight. We were in a fucking city right now, which one I had no idea whatsoever. And it was hard to ask anyone anything when everyone was running around screaming and begging to be saved from the monsters we had unleashed upon them. By now, Wendy had regained her consciousness. She was fine enough to carry herself on her own 2 feet now. Hannah, on the other hand, had been severely wounded. Her back had claw marks running all over it. It was not a pretty sight to see at all. It was gruesome and painful. But what was even more worrisome was that she was losing blood really fast. We had to do something about it soon, otherwise I feared it might be too late for her. But with the monsters running loose all around, we did not have many options. So we made her a makeshift bandage with our own clothing. This helped a little, but not much considering it was no substitute for immediate medical attention from an actual professional. But we were not even able to see a hospital during our run through the block. She kept whimpering in pain all throughout our run. Seeing her like this and hearing her distressed pleas was hurting me too. I had never imagined that one day I would see my wife in this much agony. I desperately wished to take her pain away somehow. After getting a bit away from all the commotion, we stopped under some trees to catch our breath. It was a suburban area with houses a little more spread out. By now, the commotion had reached this area too. People were getting out of their houses, and some of them were even starting to notice us. Wanting to evade any questioning and other approaching disasters, Wendy suggested we find a safer place for some rest. We were all tired from running, and Hannah's bandage needed to be redone too. We started moving again. It was hard to do so much that every muscle in me was screaming for rest. I just wanted to drop to the ground and lay there for the rest of my life. I wanted to never move a single muscle again, but we had to keep on moving. Soon we came across a house a little further from the others and completely secluded. It was covered with overgrown grass and had pretty disheveled surroundings. It had obviously been closed and unlived in. We concluded it to be a safe place for now. We circled around it to find a good place for entering the house. That was when we came across a big window at the back side of the house. Barry smashed the window and tried to clamber inside through it. Being careful while putting his hands and landing somewhat haphazardly, he got back on his feet and went to unlock the door from the inside. All of us hurriedly got inside, and I pushed the door but did not close it fully in case we needed to have a quick escape. Laying Hannah down on a nearby couch, we looked through the house, trying to make as little sound as possible. We knew the owners were away, but there could have been other dangers lurking about. After making sure we were alone in the house, we went ahead for the next course of action, finding anything in the house that might be of use to us. Wendy quickly got a hold of a first aid kit and went to work on Hannah's wounds. Barry went upstairs while I stayed downstairs as we searched the house. I was doubtful I was going to find anything useful here. The house was a little away from the main group of houses, and as we had noticed earlier, it had been unkempt for a bit now. Maybe the owners were away on their own vacation or something, but it had easily been a month since anyone had stepped inside. I gave the rooms a cursory sweep and headed for the kitchen. At the end, we couldn't really find anything of note except for some old clothes, some edibles from the pantry, and running water from the taps. We made use of those, got ourselves cleaned up and bandaged our wounds and had something to eat, however minuscule. We needed our energy to continue further. Now that we had somewhat clearer heads, we had to think up what to do next. But the only thing that came to mind first was we needed to take Hannah to the hospital. She had been unconscious for a while now, and no amount of bandages would stop the blood flow from the wounds. She needed stitches. As we were discussing our next step, Barry went outside to have a look around and get a sense of the area. Soon, he came rushing back inside, bursting with new excitement that this whole fiasco had dimmed earlier. He told us about the truck parked in the garage. We looked around the house searching for any keys but found none. But we didn't have much time to waste in looking around for them. Instead, as Barry knew how to get it moving without keys, we decided to go that route. We rushed out of the house and got in the truck. Barry took the wheel and Wendy and I took care of Hannah in the back, and thus we were on our way. Now that we had access to a vehicle, we had to look for a nearby hospital, but as we started our journey, we were not ready to see the world outside. People were running around in panic. Some braver souls were hanging from the open windows and hiding behind one thing or the other, taking pictures and videos of the havoc the monsters were wreaking in the area. Soon we were out of the suburban and into the city block. Our journey around the area had yielded the information that we were currently back in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, so navigating the areas became a little bit easier. We quickly found a nearby hospital and came to a spot. As we were getting Hannah out of the truck, the hospital staff had seen her condition and rushed to help. Moments later, as we got inside the emergency department, the hospital nurses fled the hallway and rushed towards Hannah. We watched them cater to her injuries. Some of them noticed our own less than savory conditions as well and rushed over to help. It didn't take long for us, and we were all taken care of. Hannah, however, was still under treatment. Wendy and I were sitting outside the room while Barry had opted to go into the waiting room. He soon called us all over to the waiting room as well. We stood there with bated breaths as we watched all that was going on. The television was showing scenes right out of a fantasy movie. The crowd of people were watching a large bowl of light brighten up the alleyway, people with the camera phones filming the portal coming to life. It was the portal we had come out of. The cursed portal that was the start of it all. The local news showed police officers had blocked off the streets with their weapons, curious and not knowing what they're facing up against, but ready with their arms poised nonetheless. It was all quite thrilling to see what came next, but we were not ready for what came next. As we kept waiting there, the situation kept getting worse and worse. There were bloodied bodies and mangled people everywhere. Some people had lost their lives in the commotion, being trampled on by terrified people and monsters alike. Streets and alleys were littered in bodies and smeared in blood. Just as things were getting terrifying in the city, a doctor approached us with the news about Hannah, asking us if we were aware of the seriousness of her injuries, telling us that they had been so life-threatening that if we had not brought her in the nick of time, we had almost lost her. He notified us that she had 13 staples in her back and had lost a good amount of blood, and that she was sedated at the moment. He told us she was in no condition for any visitors right now and suggested that we come back tomorrow for any further notice. By now, everyone in the hospital had come across the news and the terror was spreading through the city. There were several different codes being shouted in the speakers. People were running around and screaming, getting to their friends and family while the hospital staff was getting ready for the imminent disaster in the city. The crowd gathered around, screaming again as the news cameras showed the large reptilians charging out of the portal, rushing around and attacking everything they came across. The officers were firing back at the reptilians, but they did not deter them at all. More and more dinosaurs kept fleeing from the large portal. Barry and Wendy both suggested that we should grab Hannah and vacate the city as soon as possible. When we had found out that we were in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, I had found that comforting to be on our home turf. What was not comforting, however, was the fact that our home was now being invaded. It was on its way to being a place of mass destruction, so seeing my home city being destroyed like this was no doubt a painful thing to see. But what was an even more imminent concern was that we had to find another place to go for the time being, until whatever was supposed to happen to take care of the situation happened. As we were brainstorming for the ideas about what to do next, Barry remembered that Nelson still had his old plane stored inside his old hangar, full with fuel and ready to take off when needed. So that came out to be our next plan of action. We would need to grab Hannah and make our way to the airport. We had to be careful and sneaky about that, as none of us had any money on us at the moment and it didn't seem like an appropriate time for going to the bank. But sneaking Hannah out did not prove that much of a problem, as no one paid us any attention whatsoever. We got her out of the hospital, and just like that, we were back in the truck, ready for the next leg of the journey. It was already middle of the afternoon as we left the hospital. We were on our way to the airport now, but we had to go through some of the dangerous area before we reached our destination. It did not seem like a good idea, but it was also the only option we had. We prayed for making it out alive and set off. Hannah was still under the sedatives and unconscious. We also had to be mindful of her stitches and to try not to jostle her around too much. Soon enough, we were in the middle of all the destruction, and it was not a sight I had ever wished to see. Many of the buildings had fallen over, people inside them having gone down with them. Blood pouring out of so many places, it was nauseating. There were half-eaten human bodies just lying around, nothing but mangled leftovers. Some people had lost their lives to car crashes everywhere. Some had been trampled on by the monsters. I could spot children's toys and their bodies alike. So many young lives had gone out before reaching their full shine. But as we saw the dead, we also saw the alive. People who had come under some debris or who had survived the mad slaughter were all whimpering and crying, begging to be saved. But alas, their sounds had drowned in the roars and growls of the monsters that had brought them to this condition in the first place. I wanted to save them all. God, how I wished I could. But I was selfish. We were selfish. The world had turned into every man for himself in the blink of an eye, and unfortunately I had changed with the world. Saving myself and my wife was the priority. Saving my friends was the priority. As I saw them begging for life, I wondered about how happy I would have been if I was one of them and someone came to save me. But I was not one of them. So we kept going. We kept leaving them behind. I could see Wendy looking straight ahead with tears running down her face, and I knew she was going through the same struggle. I squeezed her hand and told her, "Not our problem." I shut my inner voice up and said, "Authorities will come and save them." It was hard to say these words, but I kept repeating them, making myself believe them just as much as her. We could also see some of the reptilians wreaking havoc in the distance, thanks to their very considerable size. Just as we were getting up close and personal with the dinosaurs, the truck abruptly stopped. We lurched forward, hearts in our throats. One of them had noticed us. Barry tried to start the truck again, but nothing. It had run out of fuel. We hadn't realized that the pointer for the fuel was broken until it was too late. The reptile was coming towards us, and we could not just stay there waiting for death to come and greet us. I picked up Hannah, and we got out of the truck. We started to slowly move in the opposite direction of the monster. We didn't want to attract it towards us any more than we already had. But alas, it had noticed us just fine without the excessive movement too. That's when we started running again, the bastard running after us. I told Wendy and Barry to check for any abandoned working cars nearby. We came across some, but none of them seemed to be in working condition. The dinosaur was closing in on us. It was just a couple hundred meters away when we found a working car. Fucking finally. We hurriedly got in and Barry slammed on the gas as we raced out of the alley at rapid speed, just as the monster's foot came down on the space we had vacated 5 seconds ago. That was a close brush with death. But we were not out of the danger yet. The reptile had picked up the pace as well, and it was coming right after us. Barry had maxed out the speed as much as he could, but finding the way in that mess was pretty darn difficult. I told him to take the smaller streets so we could try to lose him behind the buildings. The plan seemed to have worked quite well if the monster's frustrated roars were anything to go by. It tried to find us anyway by destroying the nearby buildings. It didn't find us, but I pray for every innocent soul that might have been taking refuge in there. After throwing a tantrum for a while, distracted by some other thing or person, who knows? We waited a bit more to make sure it wouldn't come back and then went on with our own journey. It was hard to make sense of the area and correct direction as many of the things were destroyed along the way. It got easier as we had left most of the affected area of the city. We came across authorities a couple times, but seeing our condition, they let us go on our way. It was already night by the time we neared the airport. As we reached the airport, we realized we didn't really have any place to go right now. We were so busy trying to get out of this hellhole alive that we had not even thought about where we would go next. Suddenly, Wendy remembered that Nelson had recently purchased a small cabin just outside of Nashville. Remembering Nelson also opened her floodgates once again that had closed in the heat of the moment. She began to cry, mentioning how Nelson had purchased that cabin for their surprise honeymoon without even telling her, and how happy she was when she had accidentally come across the information through his secretary. She had still pretended not to know anything about it. That was when I realized just how utterly fucked up this situation really was. We had all lost a person that was so dear to us. Barry's brother, my friend of 17 years, Hannah's friend of 12 years, and most importantly, Wendy's boyfriend and had been soon-to-be husband. Someone she was going to spend her whole life with. And now, suddenly he was gone from all of their lives. And we had not even had the time to properly grieve for our loss. And that was when I also realized that we might have permanently lost him, but he was still with us, still helping us from beyond, still providing us with a safety net we so desperately needed at the moment. We were going to be traveling in his plane to get away from the danger, and we were going to the place he had bought. If we came out of this alive, we would owe all our lives to him. I would be forever grateful for having him as a friend in this life. After reaching the airport, it took us some time to get access to the hangar and the plane, as Nelson was not with us. But the dire situation of the city and the disarray it had thrown the administration in came to our rescue once more. Almost everyone with a private plane was doing the same as us, leave the godforsaken place and running for their lives. So soon we got to the plane and out of the airport. We were in the air and on our way to leave the city. The military vehicles flooded the streets of the city. They were setting up camps around the city too. The government had declared a lockdown, but the frantic civilians were in no mental state to obey any such restrictions. They didn't know how long all this was going to last, and in such a state of sheer panic, they had started raiding the storefronts and other businesses to get as much as they could, to store as much as they might need. They were getting their hands on anything and everything. It was a sad sight to see. Another sad sight to see were the military jets racing across the sky, releasing bombs on the unwelcome dinosaurs. Those bombs did manage to kill some reptilian monsters, but they also managed to destroy so much more that came in their range. Most of the times those were innocent bystanders already running for their lives or hiding in surrounding buildings. In a way, the armed military had destroyed more of the city than the dinosaurs had. Would it ever get back to its former glory? Would we be able to set our feet back on this ground ever again? Were our houses already gone, or were they next? Would we be able to give Nelson a proper send-off that he rightly deserved? That was all what was going on through my head. As we flew over the city, staring out the window of our plane, witnessing the already half-destroyed city burning down even more. Some deceased dinosaurs were laying over crumbled buildings, some were wreaking havoc on others. Standing for now, but for how long, who knew? Just as no one knew what else was in store for our next journey ahead.
Target locked and ready.